Good morning. This is CBC News Network. I'm Heather Hiscox. There's a broken heart on a sign in Portapique, Nova Scotia now, and grief across the province and this country. An emotional outpouring for victims of a gunman, a crime that is both shocking and horrifying in terms of the number of dead and in how it happened. There's much we still don't know this morning, including the full extent of the tragedy. But it comes, of course, at a time of profound crisis and separation already. Again, though, we are seeing the bonds of family, friendship, and community reach out across that distance. And we will be bringing you that story this morning, keeping you up to date, of course, still on COVID-19. But this story will be our special focus on this Monday morning. At least 16 people are dead after a gunman moved through several Nova Scotia communities. 2 of the victims have now been identified: Lisa McCulley, a grade school teacher, and veteran RCMP constable Heidi Stevenson.
I believe at the beginning there was an initial motivation, and then I think it turned to randomness.
The suspected killer, 51-year-old Gabriel Wortman. Officials believe he was acting alone. RCMP confirm he also died.
It just, you think it might happen in big cities somewhere, but not here.
Rural communities rocked by unexpected, unimaginable violence. We're going to hear more from families, friends, neighbors, political officials this morning as everyone now tries to cope. Their lives make up the fabric of their communities. A teacher and an RCMP officer, 2 of the 16 people killed by the gunman over the weekend, and authorities warn there may be more. We'll be telling you as much as we can about them. This morning, we are starting to learn about Lisa McCulley, a grade school teacher. In a social media post, the Nova Scotia Teachers Union says Lisa McCulley taught at Debert Elementary. The post pays tribute to her as a passionate teacher and a shining love in the lives of her colleagues and students. That's just a brief sketch. We'll fill out her portrait as we can over the morning. And we'll also bring you the story of Constable Heidi Stevenson, a 23-year veteran of the RCMP. Let us begin this hour, though, with the latest on what we know about the tragedy. And we have reporters in 2 of the locations from the crimes yesterday. We're going to have both of them lead off our coverage this hour. Preston Mulligan is there on the left. He is in Wentworth, gauging community reaction. And Preston, just stand by if you would for a moment, please. Brett Ruskin starts for us in Portapique, right on that rural road where the tragedy began, where all the shock began unfolding with a number of 911 calls. Brett, let's just start with what we know as we begin this Monday.
Sure, Heather. Those 911 calls were called to a home just down the road from here. You can see this is the entrance to Portapique, the community, the neighborhood of 100 or so people where this all began. Police arrived at that home. They say they found casualties inside the home, outside the home as well, continued the investigation in that community and found that there was a series of residences, of structures that were on fire related to their investigation. They put out the word on social media telling people to stay in their homes, lock their doors, stay in their basements if they could. As the search expanded, this manhunt took hours to execute. There have been a number of sites that have been identified, both yesterday by RCMP as well as, in the subsequent 24 hours or so. And it all culminated in the Enfield, Nova Scotia area. That is where police initially said they took Gabriel Wortman into custody. We have now learned that he has died.
So that is where we pick things up this morning, but there are still so many unanswered questions, Brett. Maybe if we go through the timeline, it'll help us fill in some of the detail about suspect, about motive. Where do we pick up there?
Sure. Well, this all began around 11:30 Saturday night into the early morning hours of Sunday when those calls came in here. We do know that Gabriel Wortman, the suspect in this case, was a denturist. He, as the sun is coming out now here in Portapique, Nova Scotia, he was he owned a business as well as 3 properties down this roadway here. From what we've heard from clients that knew him, was very professional, was, quote, a nice guy. We have heard from RCMP officers as part of that investigation, as part of that news conference yesterday, that he actually was in possession of a vehicle that looked like an RCMP cruiser. We heard from witnesses, people who knew him, that he told folks that he liked to collect and purchase RCMP vehicles after they had been used. We also know that he had clothing that resembled RCMP uniforms. He was wearing those clothes. He was driving that vehicle when he allegedly began this mass killing that impacted so many people, so many communities all across this province.
And maybe we could just go back to that picture for a moment, Brett, because that was what was circulating at about this time yesterday. Police had put out on social media this vehicle, which looks to be an RCMP cruiser, but we're pointing out that that is the distinguishing feature on Gabriel Wortman's car that was what people should watch for, because it wasn't a legitimate RCMP car. But this was part of what police are pointing to, Brett, as indicating at least the start of this they don't feel may have been random. It moved into randomness, they indicated yesterday, but perhaps not at the beginning. Does this speak to motive at all, Brett?
Well, police were very cautious about making any determination of motive yesterday at that news conference. But they did say, indeed, that the fact that he had this police vehicle, the fact that he had these clothings, did speak to some lack of randomness, they said. They didn't say the words, premeditated or anything like that in kind of planning, but they said there was a lack of randomness at the beginning, which then shifted to randomness in terms of the killings that then subsequently happened, with no apparent link between the suspected shooter and the victims in this case. One more note about that car. Again, we were wondering whether or not it was, a vehicle, a white sedan that he had, that he put some decals on. We, again, have heard from people that have said that he did collect old police vehicles, used police vehicles. Perhaps he picked them up at auctions, and that he had one of them that had decals on it still. And so there's still so many questions about this, including surrounding that police car, surrounding so much of this at the various locations. And investigators, both here in Portapique as well as at other locations, are still sorting through those details now.
And you're right there in position for us if there are further police updates, any new details. Brett, thank you. Stand by, and I'll be with you again a little bit later on in the hour.